Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal news episode. I decided to do something a little different. People have been asking for like metagame snapshots and stuff like that occasionally in the past, and I had a nice bunch of tracked stats since the Invitational weekend and figured I'll analyze them a bit and give you a rundown of like the top 10 most played archetypes on ladder right now, and also show you how diverse the ladder is and dispute some of the potential claims that you occasionally see about how dominant certain decks are, because I can tell you the dominance of decks in this game at extreme points usually ranges between 10 and 15% of the entire metagame, which is not a lot at all. The metagame has always been extremely diverse in Eternal, except for maybe at the beginning of open beta where we had around 25% Rakano, but since then I think I have not seen anything significantly past the 15% presence of any archetype on ladder over a sample size of like 200 plus games, often not even over 100 games already. Alright, so let's dive right in. There we go. In 10th place we have Grenadines at a measly 3.3%, so that gives you an idea. The 10th most played deck is already only 3.3%. As a quick info, the data is compiled from 331 ranked games that I put in my tracker spreadsheet and that I data mined for like numbers and percentages and picked the 10 most played archetypes, which turned out to be actually 12 because there were 3 tied for like 9th place, which we'll see in a moment. Okay, so yeah, Grenadines, not that popular. This is the number that you might see possibly lower in your sample size, because I think half of these might be me running into Finkel with some decks when he plays it, so the number might be slightly inflated compared to some people. Like if they are not matched against Finkel as much, their numbers will be lower. So I'll keep these aspects in mind, especially when the number is this small. Next, tied for 9th place, we have Horu Midrange. The deck has been significantly on the decline since the release of Dead Reckoning. In the beginning it was fairly popular, people tried it out naturally, but they eventually realized the deck is still not that great and put it aside again for better decks. This also contains more aggressive Horu decks. I lumped together straight Horu midrange with the more aggressive Horu decks that start at Snowcross Jedi and top out at Leader that Ortrek top 8'd and ETS with. It was only 11 decks that I had tracked as mid-range and 3 that I had tracked as other Horu, which was the aggro deck usually. So 3 to 4. But yeah, you can still lump them together because they are not that different, and for the sake of getting some solid data I lumped them together. But if you want to separate them, then this would be tied for 10th place with Grenadines instead, rather than tied for 9th place with the other 2 decks that we see in a moment. Next off we have Gunslingers. I made a mistake here on the slide actually. It is supposed to be 4.2% and 14 as well. Sorry about that. Just didn't notice that before starting to record the video. Yeah, Gunslingers also at 14 out of 331, 4.2%. The deck is actually still pretty solid. Hailstorm is not remotely as big of a problem for the deck as it seems at first glance. Sure, the card is good and can make you lose games that you otherwise wouldn't be losing, but the card is still very beatable, and the deck happens to be really good against some of the top dogs like Argenport. Sorry about that. Like Argenport midrange and the Time midrange decks, for example. But it happens to struggle with control decks, especially Hailstorm-based control decks to some extent. Or like the unitless control deck and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a deck that is probably less popular than it should be even, since it is one of the better decks I think right now. But yeah, it has fallen a bit out of favor, partially because people are scared of Hailstorm and because they're trying like new stuff while Gunslingers, the Mad Gunslingers deck didn't get any new cards. And last but not least, tied for 9th place is Icaria Black, or Removal Pile, or whatever you want to call it, also at 4.2% and faced 14 times. All the data is since the Sunday of the Invitational, where the decklists were already public, and the Invitational results were impacting ladder to give you like a solid cutoff of where the last big change to the metagame happened. And yeah, this is partially due to Kamado going, I think, 4-0 on day 1 of the Invitational and making day 2 of the Invitational with the deck again, putting it back in focus. And yeah, the deck also just being solidly positioned and a very solid deck all around, so no big surprise here. But yeah, it was barely seen for quite some time and has been popping back up. Next in 8th place we have Elysian Midrange, 4.5%, 15 out of 331. This is a bit of a mystery to me. I think the deck is not very good. People liking it more than they should. The deck is not even that as great against Praxis in my experience as it should be, so it's not even completely demolishing the other time mid-range deck, and it's just basically worse than Praxis in every possible way to me. And yeah, I just can't see ever running this over Praxis, but people do, and I keep beating them even with Praxis when I play Praxis, so not sure what to tell you, just don't play Elysian, but people will probably do that for a while, partially because of Equivocate and Araka and wanting to like play with those cards and hoping they make Elysian better or good. But yeah, these are the numbers. In 7th place, or sort of tied with Elysian, we have Unitless Felon Pod Control, also 4.5% at also 15 in total. This deck has been growing in popularity since Tin Man took it to ETS and generally started working on unitless control, and a lot of people like these kind of decks, and finally having a version that did well and someone has championed it and popularized it more. All the people that have been waiting for a deck like this and couldn't figure out the list themselves, happily picking it up and jamming it. Deck is decent in my experience, but probably also more popular than it is good in my experience anyway. But it is a solid deck, unlike Elysian in my opinion. Anyway, on to the next archetype. Next we have Recano Aggro in 6th place at 4.8%. Yeah, not much to say. Recano Aggro still around, still pretty popular, even with Hailstorm. But yeah, Hailstorm is a particularly big problem for this deck compared to, say, Gunslingers, because they can go wider, they can reload easier and more, while this is just all 1-for-1 threats, and you need multiples in play to pressure the opponent, and Hailstorm sweeps them all at once except for your Crown Watch Paladins, or like random units that got Warcry. I haven't liked Recano for a long time. I think the deck is arguably the worst aggro deck. It doesn't have the resiliency and the explosiveness of Skycrag, and nor the reach, and it doesn't have the the power, the aggressive power and punch, and also interaction that, say, the Mad Gunslingers deck has with pistols and madness and combust and all that stuff, and also their durability of the Grenadin's anti-removal go wide plan and the hard punch of the charge units. So Recano is not really good at anything. A lot It has random mid-range equality units that have keywords like lifesteal that are not even relevant in aggro outside of facing other aggro decks most of the time. And yeah, you're just not particularly good at anything other than beating up on other aggressive decks in my experience. If you want to play fire aggro, I recommend Skycrack or Stone Scar, not Rakano. But yeah, people like it. It's one of the cheapest and more straightforward decks to get into, so a lot of people that just start out build it as their first deck because it's fairly cheap, especially if you don't run Deep Forge Blade and the deck has 0 legendaries, I think. Anyway, on to the 5th place. In 5th place we have Praxis Midrange at 21. We see a pretty big jump here from Rakano to Praxis. The top 5 all have drastically higher representation compared to the rest of the decks we looked at. So you can see this as like a top 10 list and as a top 5 list, because it also makes sense to cut it as a top 5. I just wanted to give a broader picture of the metagame without going too narrow, but the top 5 are like the big players in the metagame and the decks that you see the most and that you should be concerned with the most. But as you can see, still only 6.3% for a deck that is this popular. So popular in this game still doesn't mean a big part of the metagame, just a bigger part than most other things, because it's really just very diverse. But yeah, Praxis Midrange, easily the best time midrange deck in my experience. Initially I wasn't too sure if Xenon might be better and all, but so far it seems that Praxis is just better than Xenon and the best time midrange deck overall. And I recently played a fair share of Praxis since I recorded the last video, and I have to say I'm surprisingly impressed with the deck, and it is better than I assumed and than my past experiences gave me the impression of. Yeah, and it's just gotten some nice tools lately with some of the changes, like Reliquary Raider was a pretty great addition to the deck, for example, even though that was before Dead Reckoning. And yeah, the deck is just pretty well rounded by now, and the core of the deck is pretty well hammered down and working really well. Anyway, on to the top 4. In the top 4 we have Icaria Blue. Not significantly more popular than Praxis, 6.6% of the metagame, just faced it one time more over 331 games. But yeah, this is still the most popular Icaria control deck, which I am honestly a bit surprised by, because I think overall Icaria Black is the more well-rounded and consistent of the Icaria control decks. But yeah, people like to draw cards and they like Hailstorm, so they play the less consistent Icaria Blue that is also arguably worse at consistently dealing with whatever they have to deal with, because their removal is more narrow and situational, causing some problems. And it also has less crests. But yeah, it is the Icaria deck that you will usually face if you face an Icaria deck. And on to the top 3. In the top 3 we have the probably best and also most popular fire aggro deck, Skycrack Aggro. No surprise here to me. For a while Rakano was more popular, which was very surprising to me, but it seems that people that like to play aggro came around on Skycrack being just better than Rakano, and playing Skycrack, it's the most powerful and yeah, fast hitting aggressive deck. Like the most aggressive deck, the Stone Scar deck, can hit pretty hard and has a lot of charge, but it's much slower and much less aggressive. It's more of a like good stuff aggressive deck, and can even play a bit aggro control as well. This is pure speed and aggression and resiliency basically. And yeah, seems to do well enough for enough people to play it a lot and rank in at third most popular deck on ladder right now. Okay, on to the second place. That might be potentially a bit of a surprise to some people. Argenport only in second place. Second most popular deck on ladder, 8.7%, 29 out of 331. It's even a bit surprising to me, honestly, because I think the deck is very good. I definitely underestimated how much impact that Reckoning changes had on making Crownwatch Paladin playable, and with the 8/2 drops and playable 4-cost weapon, how playable Interrogator has become. And obviously if Interrogator is playable, that's a pretty significant power and quality increase to any archetype, since the card is really good if you can reasonably well support it, especially because it even replaces itself right away. If you can play it with a Warcry trigger on it, you immediately draw a card even if the opponent kills it. So it is just really good, and if it sticks around for a couple turns, it's really hard to lose. And the deck just became more aggressive, a bit more resilient with having an Aegis 2-drop. And yeah, even though the Protect nerf hurts the deck in the tournament theoretically, losing one of the best post-sideboard cards the deck had, the deck surprisingly got better since that Reckoning and the Protect nerf than before, which is something I only sort of realized after jamming like 100 games on ladder with it and getting a feel for how this new take on the deck feels and performs, and also what version I like. I will also do a deck tag on what I think the ideal 75 or Argenport mid-range should be right now. Anyway, on to the king of ladder, the most popular archetype right now, and a lot of you can guess it by now because it hasn't shown up by now so far. It's Felon Control at 12.3% and 41 times faced over 331 games. This is actually really surprising to me. Sure, the deck got some nice tools in Hailstorm and in Cold Blood, but in Cold Blood is way overrated. I wouldn't even run 4, since you want feeding times to be able to deal with Dawnwalkers. If you have no ways to deal with Dawnwalkers, you are in a world of hurt, and I keep beating up these Felon Control decks with Praxis because they have in Cold Blood and I have Dawnwalker, and they just get pooped on by my Dawnwalkers with Killer and stuff. So, and yeah, Hailstorm is nice, but in the end still a narrow card that is great in some matchups and pretty lackluster in others. Daraka is not a good control card and should not really be in control decks if you ask me, and the deck lost Vara, and I think the deck pretty sure was better before when it had Vara and no Hailstorm and in Cold Blood than it is now with in Cold Blood and Hailstorm and no Vara. But yeah, people seem to really like it, some people seem to do really well with it, but in my experience the deck is significantly worse than it used to be, and also yeah, significantly worse than other decks like Praxis Midrange and Argenport, for example, have felt and performed significantly better for me on ladder over larger sample sizes than my impressions of Felon have been so far. I might give it another shot and play it some more, but I'm just not very impressed by how the deck feels and performs so far. But yeah, people like what they like, and in the end it doesn't matter how justified their choice of deck is. In the end you have to prepare to deal with what other people like, no matter for what reason they like it. So this is the big bad right now. This is one of the most important decks on ladder to be able to beat, but still don't overrate it, since it's still only 12.3%, so it's gonna be a bit more than 1 in 10 games that you see a Felon Control deck. That is still not a lot, and that's what I meant. Like, popularity in this game is still not very popular. Like, if a deck is popular, it's still usually only gonna be like 1 in 10, less than 2 in 10 games that you see it. So you can't really yeah, skew your deck heavily towards a specific archetype, because it's gonna hurt you more than it will help you in the end if you end up facing different archetypes in 8 or 9 out of 10 games than the one archetype that you're trying to like hate on or target. You're gonna hurt yourself more in those other 8 or 9 games than you're helping yourself in those 1 or 2 games that you face it on average. So that's why I always build more generally well-rounded, well-balanced decks, and advocate in general to other people to doing the same, because the metagame is just not skewed enough towards specific decks. The metagame has always been vastly diverse outside of that 25% Rakano time at the beginning of open beta that I talked about. So you're not doing yourself a favor if you skew your deck heavily towards 1 or 2 archetypes. Because there is, as you can see, 5 to 10 archetypes that you will face with a reasonable frequency that you need to be able to beat, and they range from most aggressive to most controlling. So the best thing you can do, especially if you don't have a sideboard available, is just build a well-rounded, well-balanced deck that works best possible against the full range of archetypes and popular decks right now, rather than just skewing them heavily towards a specific deck. And also, people might try to argue this data is like my personal metagame or the metagame of a specific, I don't know, rank or whatever, but it really isn't. Like, I play against people that are diamond, I play against people that are high and medium rank masters. I even occasionally get paired against gold players. There are games from all kinds of opponents in there, basically. So it is, in the end, a pretty diverse set of games, and I'm pretty sure if someone else would have a similar size database of the same time frame since the Invitational to now, with like 300 to 400 games, and would data mine them, the major points would be the same, like roughly the same archetypes in the list will be contained. Some of the numbers would fluctuate a bit because the sample size is not that big. As you saw, a lot of like decks have been faced the same time, at the same amount and stuff, but all in all I'm pretty sure that this is a mostly fairly representative percentage or distribution of the metagame, with some variance and some outliers like Grenadins, like I mentioned, for example, and maybe Horu being on the down low and stuff like that. Alright, I'm not sure how often I will do something like this, but I figured while I had the data and people like this kind of stuff, I'll do it for a change and see how it's perceived, and maybe see if and when I want to do another one of these to give you some idea of like what to expect and prepare for on later. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Also, how surprised you are by the metagame and the distribution of the decks. Because this is all just pure data, this is no opinion of mine or anything, it's just straight up facts that are very objective and have been experienced this way, without any subjective opinion or weighting or anything. Alright, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe down below, turn on the notification icon to not miss any future content, and let me know in the comments what you think. That's it again. This was Eternal News with my first metagame snapshot for Eternal. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Manu S. See you next time, and I'm out.